Hello and welcome to the end of the beginning for online giving. I'm Steve MacLaughlin, Vice President of Data and Analytics at Blackbaud, and I want to take you on a journey where we're going to revisit the past 20 years of online giving, as well as talking about what does the future hold for digital and other types of giving scenarios. It's interesting to think about the fact that online giving has now been with us for 20 years now. The first real instances of online giving first began in 1999. That's when Blackbaud started processing online donations for nonprofit organizations around the world, and it's only really grown since then. And it's useful to think about all of the things and companies and digital experiences that didn't exist in 1999, that have only come around in the last couple of years, or certainly since 1999. Everything from Airbnb to Twitter to Tesla, iPods, LinkedIn, the Kindle, Xbox, Zettabytes, those types of things. All things that came after online giving was first invented and has really taken shape over a number of years. So a first place to start when we think about the end of the beginning for online giving is, what are lessons that we've learned? What are things that we need to start doing? What are things that nonprofit organizations need to stop doing? And also, what do we need to continue doing? How do we continue to grow in our use of digital technologies over time? For starters, I really believe that we have to stop acting like online giving is still a new thing. It's not. It's been around for 20 years now. It's a grown up. It's moved out of the house, right? Online giving is not a new thing. And yet we know a lot of organizations continue to treat it as though, oh, well, there's this online thing and it's new and it's different. And it's, how do we think about it in terms of the traditional types of channels that we've used to both engage and build relationships with donors over time? And so a good place for us to stop right now is to stop acting like online giving is a new thing. It's not. What do we need to start doing? I really believe we need to start embracing the fact that the next 20 years are going to bring even more change than we've seen over the past 20 years. Again, we've seen a tremendous amount of change in the past 20 years in terms of how digital, mobile, social, a number of different types of channels have really emerged and evolved over time in the ways in which we're using them. But the reality is that's going to pale in comparison to the types of changes we're likely to see over the next 20 years from now. And as nonprofit organizations, nonprofit professionals, we need to get much more comfortable with the rate of change, embracing change, dealing with change, because what's going to happen over the next 20 years is going to be even bigger than what's happened in the past 20 years. What do we need to continue doing? Well, we really need to continue to focus on multi-channel giving experiences. Now, whenever we talk about online versus offline, all these types of things, the reality is that's oftentimes, internal thinking that we think about within our organizations. And though most donors really don't think of themselves as being an online donor versus being an online donor, that's oftentimes an internal distinction that we make. The reality is that we know that multi-channel experiences that leverage direct marketing, direct mail, phone, mobile, social, digital, web, that it's the combination of those multiple channels that really drive the best types of giving experiences. And so in our mindset, as we think about the future, as we think about what will we do differently, we need to continue to focus on multi-channel giving experiences. That it may be a number of different channels that interact with individuals over time that really truly drive more giving, loyalty in giving over time across a broad range of supporters and different constituents. Now, admittedly, this is hard. Asking organizations and professionals to embrace change, to continue to want to level up in the work that they're doing. This is hard, and many nonprofit organizations will choose not to level up. They'll say, hey, I just want to continue to do things the way we've always done them. I want to continue to do things in a particular way. That's going to happen, but hopefully you, being part of Fundraising Online today, participating and watching this session, you're an organization that does want to level up, that does want to improve what you're doing. And that's really critical to not only the success of your organization, but what you're able to do going forward. Now, I mentioned, one of the things we have to think about is forgetting this notion of making a distinction between online donors and offline donors. Oftentimes, it's an internal distinction that we make. And yet we know from looking at the data what happens here. Oftentimes we hear people say, online donors, that's just cannibalizing offline giving. Those are people who are already going to give. They've just chosen to give online. It's the same people. Well, it turns out that that's not necessarily true. When we look at the data, and this is some data from Target Analytics, which is a division of Blackbaud that does a tremendous amount of benchmarking on both different types of fundraising programs. What they found was when you start with an offline acquired donor, someone who made their first gift offline, perhaps through the mail, that when they make their second gift, only about 3% of those donors switch channels and choose to give online. Now, what happens when we look at online acquired donors? Slightly different phenomenon in the data. When an online donor renews their gift, about 17% of those donors switch and start giving offline. So you could actually argue in the data that offline giving is cannibalizing online giving, and we should really sort of punish the online team for making that happen. And that's silly, right? That there is an actual cannibalization going on. What you're seeing is that people will ebb and flow between channels, and the reality is most people who are acquired offline for giving continue to give offline. They don't switch channels. But that there is a percentage, close to 20% of online acquired donors do switch channels and choose to give offline. And I think one of the fundamental reasons for that is when we take a look at the fundraising programs of different organizations, they treat these donors differently. In a lot of cases, organizations have a much more mature program for engaging and stewarding their offline donors than their online donors. And so maybe it's not so much of a surprise that people switch to giving offline, because in many ways they get better treatment at organizations. And again, that shouldn't matter. In a world where we're using multiple channels, this big distinction between online and offline really should not make as big of a difference as we think. Oftentimes I remind people that we should not confuse the channel of engagement with the channel of the transaction. Now, it used to be, before the internet, when all we had were techniques and tools like direct mail, that we would send a mailing and money would come back in the mail. And so we would say, aha, the channel of engagement, that direct mail piece, was also the channel of the transaction. Very easy to figure out attribution. But you add in digital technologies and suddenly we may have made a phone call. They may have saw an online ad. They could have seen something on social media. They may have received a direct mail piece, and yet they chose to make the transaction online because it was just convenient. It didn't mean that they didn't read the magazine or didn't see the direct mail piece or didn't attend the event. It was more of the convenience factor of online. So I stress it's really important to not confuse the channel of the engagement with the channel of the transaction, because there can be different motivations for why people choose to engage through a particular channel. But in a lot of cases, especially as we look at younger donors and we look at the growth of so many more channels that are available, that transaction, that ease of use piece may happen in the digital space out of convenience, out of lower friction. And it doesn't mean that it wasn't because they weren't engaged using other channels. Another area that we think we've uncovered thinking about the past 20 years of online giving is that common best practice still remains uncommon. That what we know works isn't necessarily in practice by all organizations. So over the past 20 years, we now know a lot about what does work and what does not work when it comes to online giving. A tremendous amount of testing has taken place. A tremendous amount of work to fine-tune best practices. And yet we know that despite all the things we've learned, there's still a lot of organizations who still just don't practice common best practices. These are some findings from the online fundraising scorecard research done by Dunham & Company. They've actually done 2 of these research studies that you can search for online and take a look at the report. But one of the things that Dunham & Company did is they looked at over 100 charities, and they looked to see how many of these charities followed what has been shown to be true best practice in terms of certain practices around email, digital engagement, online fundraising, and follow-up. And even when they looked at some of the largest charities, organizations that you would think are really embracing and following what is accepted as best practice, they found that that doesn't actually happen. They found that 60% of email sign-up forms still can't be found easily. 33% of emails have multiple conflicting calls to action, a thing we know through testing and lots of webinars and lots of conference sessions that you shouldn't do. A third of organizations are still doing that. 65% of donation forms do not pre-select a giving level, even though we know through a tremendous amount of rigorous testing that produces a better result. And so, despite having 20 years of learning, lots of testing, organizations still not following these best practices. And certainly I know this from over the years of working with organizations who do a lot of testing and those that don't do a lot of testing. Whether you do or you don't, there is a body of knowledge out there that you can take advantage of. And what we continue to see is organizations still aren't using some of these common best practices. What I believe is that the future will reward nonprofits that move on to next generation best practices designed to optimize the entire giving experience. And so while we have a certain amount of organizations that are still laggards, relatively speaking, about the adoption of best practices, we're going to have organizations who really transform and improve their digital fundraising programs because they move on to the next set of best practices. The reality is oftentimes some of these best practices are over a long period of time. They can tend to be watered down. There are a whole set of organizations out there who are testing that next set of best practices that everyone's going to be talking about, but the reality is, are we actually willing and prepared to start doing them? The next big point I want to make is that mobile is the new normal. Full stop, hands down, that's where we are today. Now, mobile, when it comes to online and digital fundraising, has changed a lot in the past few years. And we've gone through some different stages that I think are important to point out. Now, in terms of mobile giving in the United States, probably the big moment was in 2010, following the Haiti earthquake, where there were tens of millions of dollars raised in the US via text to give. And certainly we know text to give in other countries, in particular the UK, have had periods of success. Now, what we found was there was the initial spike in interest in text to give in 2010 following the Haiti earthquake, but it never really materialized. And one of the reasons for that, I believe, is it was the right medium, just the wrong method, particularly for US-based not-for-profit organizations. It was the right medium in the sense that, yes, the mobile phone is a powerful device. We can do so many things on it. But text to give really ended up being the wrong method, mostly because of how the telecom industry is regulated in the United States, limits on how much could be given, limits on privacy, limits on how the data was used. And so using the mobile device as a call to action and reaching out to supporters or potential supporters as a mechanism via mobile, that was the right device, the right medium, just the wrong method. What we know, fast forwarding to today, is that giving on mobile devices only continues to grow, but not through text to give. It's primarily through the fact that on a smartphone, I've got a web browser, I can go to a web page, I can read email, I can do all these types of things, and I can be directed towards a mobile optimized page for my giving. Now, one of the things that Blackbaud Institute has looked at for a number of years now is the percentage of online giving that happens on a mobile device. And you can see here from the chart, we've tracked this going back to 2014 when it was only 9%. In 2018, it was 24%. 24% of online giving took place on a mobile device in 2018. So we're well over the tipping point. Certainly we know some organizations see higher levels than this, but this is shifting. This is a great example of how consumer trends, consumer behavior ultimately translate over a period of time into donor behavior. That shift is rapidly increasing, and mobile is a great example. So, mobile is the new normal, and the importance of optimizing our email communication, our digital communication, our websites, our landing pages, our donation forms being optimized for mobile is so important, because this is where people are coming from, especially when episodic events or other types of activities. It's really important. There are 7 billion people on Earth. 5 billion of them have a mobile device. 3.5 billion of them have a smartphone, which is more than people have desktop, laptop, computer. So the future is mobile, and I think in the coming years, you're only going to see this increase. Mobile is not optional. It's the new normal. It's only going to get bigger. And when we're thinking about how we engage with supporters, activists, volunteers, different supporter groups, mobile has to be one of the areas that we're optimizing for. Mobile has to be a part that we're trying to drive a better experience for supporters. Year end is a dead end. So again, over the past 20 years, the importance of end of year giving, the number of conference sessions, emails, webinars, tips, tricks, all these things, we've gotten very focused on end of year giving. Although I firmly believe that most end of year giving is a trap. Shout out to Admiral Akbar here. That especially in the digital world, the more organizations continue to rely on the last few days of the year to hit their fundraising goals is really a trap, especially when we think about the amount of messages coming into the inbox, social media, SMS, those types of things. We're really bombarding individuals over time with a lot of messages, and really pushing it too far to the end of the year is a trap and a problem. But we're seeing a shift. This is some data from the Blackbaud Institute. We looked at the percentage of overall giving and the percentage of online giving to US-based charities. This is some analysis that looks at about a little over 30 billion in giving. And what we have found, since we've been looking at this over a number of years, is the percentage of giving that happens in December, both online and offline, continues to shift away from December. So in some ways, this is a good trend, right? That December is becoming less of a crowded place for giving. It's spreading out to other parts of the year, and that's really positive. I mean, ultimately, we want organizations to have a diversified fundraising program that doesn't have all these sort of peaks and valleys and spikes, but is more even across the year, and certainly moving and planning away from a less of an emphasis on the last few days of December. A more holistic approach is certainly very positive for organizations. So, the simple advice here is stop focusing so much on the last few days of the year. What you really want to do is start diversifying your fundraising across all 365 days of the year. This is especially true with organizations who drive a lot of recurring giving, sustainer giving. That's very positive, and is a great way to sort of diversify giving across the entire year as well. Another topic here, socializing with the crowd. And so certainly, we know that for a number of years, the increase in giving through social media has been really remarkable. In the early days of sort of digital social media, we started to see this with things like peer-to-peer type of fundraising events, run, walk, ride type of fundraising events. But now, social media is a real growing area where there's an opportunity for giving. Well, and whether we call it peer-to-peer fundraising, crowdfunding, independent fundraising, again, it's real. It continues to grow over time. And with some research from the Blackbaud Institute, we did some generational research, and certainly one of the things that we found is as you start to look at younger donors, Gen X, millennials, Generation Z, that social media is becoming a much more accepted way to ask for a donation. And again, if we think about this past 20 years where initially a lot of online giving was opportunistic, and then there was a use of a lot of email, and now there's a lot of use of social media and mobile. Again, this is an evolving and emerging way in which to engage with people. But when we do research with supporters, social media continues to be a channel where people are comfortable with being asked for a donation, and in some circumstances we continue to see it grow for organizations over time. Now, certainly we know in the past couple of months, a lot of things happening in the social media space around privacy, security, how data is used, those types of things, or even the shifting model for a lot of the social media sites that are out there. I think we have to get real and realize that your opinions about social media, while interesting, are irrelevant. If it is a place where your supporters choose to engage, if it's a place where your supporters choose to go to get information, to interact, then we want to be able to meet them and engage with them in those places. Again, there's some sort of volatility, some uncertainty, some strong opinions about social media at the moment, but I think it's important to understand it is a successful channel for a lot of organizations from a fundraising perspective. You're going to continue to see grow that over time, and this is just one of those evolving, emerging areas that we need to continue to pay attention to. So those are some of the big themes that really caught my attention of looking back on 20 years of online giving and where are we really now. I've also spent a lot of time thinking about, well, what do the next 20 years look like? And it's hard sometimes to predict things, especially if they're about the future. But I think we have a sense of where some of the emerging technology trends are going, how we might choose to use some of them, and how it informs what is likely to change in the future. So I want to point out a couple of things that I'm paying attention to that I think nonprofit professionals and sort of savvy organizations are going to start to look at as well. The first one is virtual reality, and if the photo doesn't give it away, I'm a bit skeptical about virtual reality. I think we find that there's some challenges with people wearing the headset and being locked away and not being able to engage with the real world. But what you're really going to see over the next 20 years is more of the use of augmented reality. And so some of you remember from just a few years ago the Pokemon Go craze, where I could be on my mobile device and it superimposes the characters within the real world. Snapchat does this with things. You're seeing it show up in the retail and the banking sector. You're also starting to see augmented reality show up with not-for-profit organizations, where I've seen examples where they're taking a major donor and showing them where a part of a building will be built because of their gift, and they can sort of see it superimposed on the real world. I think you're going to see things like augmented reality being used by a wide range of charities to really show the impact that's possible in the real world. And the technology is there today. I think what you're going to start to see is it's just going to get applied in some settings that are good for social good organizations. Another transformation I believe you're going to see is the growth of stream raising. So we've lived through a period of peer-to-peer fundraising, walk, run, ride type of events. So those physical, in-person type of peer-to-peer fundraising things. But with both the growth in online gaming and the evolution of what's possible with the fundraising tools, you're really seeing a growth in what we sort of call stream raising, right? And so examples of people using the Just Giving platform and Twitch, so that gamers can not only just do their thing on the gaming side, but also help to fundraise for important causes. And again, it's just another area. I know of today organizations who are already raising millions of dollars per year through stream raising. They're sort of on the leading edge of this particular trend. But I know that this is going to be another huge wave that when we look back just a few years from now, wow, the tremendous growth, and it's going to become much more widespread, and it's a big opportunity for nonprofit organizations. Artificial intelligence, got to touch on this topic. I think in many ways we often think about the strong form of artificial intelligence, strong AI, being C3PO, this all-knowing robot who can help translate lots of languages and knows bocce and can help with water evaporators. But the reality is most AI that we use today is weak AI, still powerful, right? Siri, Alexa, Cortana, those types of digital assistant devices, very powerful, but often very focused and very good at sort of specific tasks. And so artificial intelligence, huge opportunity as long as we start to manage our expectations. I think most of us, what we really want is actual intelligence, not just artificial intelligence. And the reality is, so much of artificial intelligence is really about machine intelligence, the use of things like deep learning, machine learning, those types of techniques. But there are certainly a lot of really practical applications for artificial intelligence. It's something that I spend a lot of time working with the teams at Blackbaud on, is how we use these types of technologies. But it is an area that will continue to emerge over time to help us do things from a digital perspective, but a whole wide range of areas that can be really helpful to organizations of lots of different shapes, sizes, and missions. So those are some of my predictions about where we're going to go over the next 20 years. I really believe that we are at the end of the beginning for online giving. This past 20 years has flown by. We've learned a lot. We've seen a lot. There's an opportunity now to make some adjustments, to stop, start, and continue some really critical and important behaviors. I think that the future of giving in general will be completely unrecognizable from the past. Again, we're not in an online, offline world anymore. We're in a world of giving experiences. And I think the future has some really exciting potential things. Some of this should scare you. That's okay. I also hope that some of this should really energize you. There's just some really amazing possibilities that can be unlocked for nonprofit organizations on a global scale. And the past 20 years has been amazing, but the next 20 years is going to be even more amazing in ways that we might not totally comprehend or understand today. But trust me, it's going to be great. And really looking forward to taking this journey with so many of you together into the future. And with that, thank you for your time. Thanks for joining this Fundraising Online session. And we hope you'll take a moment to complete the short session evaluation. And hopefully we've got some time for some questions here as well. Thanks again, everybody.